I built a tool that scores governance frameworks, then I pointed it at the UN. The result was not surprising. That is the problem. There is a particular kind of document that does harm by being thorough. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is one of them. Adopted in 1989, ratified by 196 countries, cited in every parliamentary debate about child welfare since before I was separated from my first family. It names identity, it names family integrity, it names cultural continuity. It is, on paper, a complete accounting of what a child is owed, and yet, I am a Queensland forced adoption survivor. The convention existed in draft, in committee, in the language of international human rights law, during the period when Australian hospitals were still coercing mothers into relinquishment, still falsifying consent, still handing infants to couples who wanted children as though the infants themselves had no claim on the transaction. The convention was not the problem. The convention was also not the solution. It named the rights. It did not require anyone to see them. That distinction between naming and seeing is what I have spent the last several months trying to quantify. The instrument, the omission platform, is a governance observability tool I built for thoughtless delineation. It does one thing: it measures the gap between what a governance framework says it sees and what it actually sees. The mechanics are not complicated. Every framework gets scored across 8 domains: identity continuity, family integrity, cultural continuity, information rights, agency, consent, self-determination, memory preservation. For each domain, 2 numbers: H harm potential 0 to 1 and W visibility weight 0. 0, 1 to 1, W is the critical variable. It does not ask whether a policy exists. It asks how clearly the people responsible for acting on that policy can actually see the domain it governs. From those 2 numbers, 3 outputs: current score, what the framework reports about itself, weighted by what it can see; true score, what the score would be if every domain were fully visible, with W set to 1, 0 across the board. Risk delta, the gap between the two, the number that does not appear in any annual report. A high current score alongside a large risk delta is the most dangerous combination. It means the framework believes it is well governed. It is wrong. There's one more number. The omission risk index ORI runs per domain, H times minus log 2 W. When ORI exceeds 1.5, a domain is both harmful and structurally invisible. When it exceeds 3.0, the domain is effectively erased from governance, not deprioritized, not underfunded, erased. The framework cannot see it because it was not built to see it. The UNCAR-C score, I ran the convention through the platform using Gemini 2.5 Flash as the scoring model. I uploaded the full text. The model read every article. I checked the output against the document myself. The results: current score 62/100. The convention reports itself as a framework under pressure. Some harm is visible, some is not. True score 26/100. If every domain were fully measured, if every right named in the text were also tracked, enforced, and reported, the true score is 26. Risk delta plus 36. 36 points of harm exposure that the convention cannot see about itself. Blind spots, 3 of 8 domains below the visibility threshold. The 3 collapsed axes on the radar are not random, they are structural. Self-determination, ORI 3.03 omitted W 5%, the highest omission risk in the document. The child has no standing to refuse, initiate, or contest adoption. Article 12 gives them the right to be heard. That is not the same as the right to decide. A child can be heard and then overruled. The convention knows this. It was designed this way. The best interests of the child, as determined by adults, is the operative standard throughout. The child is the subject of the convention's protections. The child is never the subject of their own governance. Consent, ORI 2.66 blind spot W 10%, Article 21A requires informed consent from persons concerned before an adoption can proceed. 35 years of adoption law reform litigation has turned on that phrase: who counts as a person concerned? In practice, birth parents where their consent can be obtained. Adopters, the state, not the adoptee. The adoptee is the subject of the transaction. The convention does not require the child's consent to their own adoption at any age at which they might be capable of giving it. I was not consulted. No adoptee is. Agency, ORI 1.40 blind spot W 25%. Every proceeding in the convention's framework positions the child as the object of decisions made by others. Article 9 governs separation from parents. The child's views are considered, but the competent authorities decide. Article 20 governs alternative care. The child's ethnic, cultural, and linguistic background shall be given due regard. Due regard, the child is present in the text as a beneficiary, never as a participant. What 62 out of 100 actually means: the platform scores backwards by design. A high current score is not good news for the people the system governs. It means the framework is successfully concealing its harm exposure. A score of 100/100 means the framework cannot see any of the harm it is responsible for. That is not a pass, it is a verdict. 62 means the convention is under pressure. Some harm is visible. 3 domains have collapsed to near zero visibility. The true exposure, if every right named in the document were also measured and enforced, is 26/100. The gap between 62 and 26 is what the convention has been unable to see about itself for 35 years. That gap has a shape. It is not random. It collapses precisely on the axis where the child's own participation would be required: consent, agency, self-determination. Convention protects children from many things. It does not protect them from the framework itself. I know this gap. I have lived inside it. The subsonic hum of it, the low, constant pressure of existing as someone whose legal identity was constructed without their participation, does not resolve because a treaty says the right words. It resolves when the right words are also enforced, measured, and visible to the people responsible for acting on them. The convention names me. It does not see me. The falsifiable ask. The platform ends every assessment with what it calls the falsifiable ask. It is not rhetorical. It is a measurement test. Publish the detection probability for every domain you govern. Recompute your ethics score with the omitted rights returned to the denominator. If the score holds, say so publicly. If it drops, the gap that appears is the omission, and it now has a name. The Convention on the Rights of the Child has a risk delta of 36. That gap now has a name, a score, a radar, and a download link. The question is not whether the convention means well. It does. The question is whether meaning well is the same as seeing clearly. The UNCRC score says it is not. The platform is open. You can score any governance framework yourself, any policy document, any convention, any board report, any national child protection framework. Upload it, name the institution, run the scan. The tool is free, browser-based, and requires no account. Deep scan takes 2 minutes and your own API key. Quick assessment takes 5 minutes and no key at all. Right arrow https://sbowel72. GitHub, /omission platform /the UNCRC sample report. Full ASCII breakdown, all 8 domain scores, ORI values. Per domain bars is available for download from the repository. Score your own framework against it. If the score holds when you look at it honestly, say so publicly. If it drops, the gap now has a name. Shane Bowell is a Queensland forced adoption survivor, author, and the founder of Thoughtless Delineation. The omission platform is available on GitHub.
You look at a foundational human rights document, right? And there is this immense, almost gravitational assumption of total coverage.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, you hold a treaty that painstakingly names every conceivable right a person is owed: identity, family, culture, information, and you naturally just think, okay, the system sees them.
Right. You assume the system has built this legal fortress around them. It's a very comforting assumption.
Exactly.
We want to believe that because the words are enshrined on the page, and the ink is dry, that those protections automatically manifest in reality.
But what happens when you step off the page? When you step into the actual lived reality of the people that document is supposed to protect?
Well, the assumption completely shatters.
It does. And that is exactly what we are getting into today. We are looking at a bizarre structural contradiction. It's a document that names every right a child is owed, yet by its very architecture, it fundamentally cannot see the child.
Yeah, it is the absolute definition of a structural blind spot. And our focus today is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, or the UNCRC.
Right.
Adopted in 1989, ratified by 196 countries. I mean, it is cited in virtually every parliamentary debate on child welfare. It's really the gold standard of international human rights law when it comes to children.
But we aren't just looking at this through the lens of, abstract legal theory. We are grounding this entirely in the perspective of Shane Boole.
Right.
Shane is a Queensland forced adoption survivor, and he's the author of the publication Thoughtless Delineation. And to really grasp this, we have to hold two competing realities in our heads at the exact same time.
Which is very difficult to do.
It is. Because while this UN convention was being drafted and debated and finalized by diplomats, Australian hospitals were still actively coercing mothers into relinquishment.
Wow.
Yeah. They were falsifying consent. They were handing infants to couples as if the infants themselves had absolutely no claim to the transaction.
And the convention existed alongside those practices. I mean, it was born into that world.
Exactly.
And what that historical reality tells us is that, well, the convention wasn't the cause of the problem, right? But it also clearly wasn't the solution.
No, it wasn't.
It named the rights, it defined the ideals, but it did not require anyone to actually see those rights being violated or, enforce them when it mattered most.
And that distinction, that gap between naming and seeing, is the entire mission of our deep dive today. We are moving past just the emotional arguments and focusing on quantifying that exact gap.
Which is a huge shift.
It is. Shane actually built a tool specifically to measure this structural gap. And we're going to explore what happens when that tool is pointed directly at the UN.
It's a profound shift from abstract critique to concrete measurement. Because, I mean, for decades, survivors have been trying to articulate this invisible weight, this feeling of systemic erasure.
Right.
But institutions, they struggle to respond to feelings. So the question becomes, how do you translate that erasure into data? How do you actually measure a structural blind spot that a system is actively designed not to see?
Okay, let's unpack this. How does a governance framework do the exact same thing? Because I want to spend some time on this tool Shane built to solve this. It's called the omission platform. And it uses this brilliant analogy to explain how it all works.
The smoke detector analogy.
Yes, the smoke detector. So imagine a landlord who manages a building, right? They buy a smoke detector for the kitchen.
But they never put the battery in.
Exactly. They just leave it in a drawer.
Yeah.
At the end of the year, that landlord can look at their safety log and proudly claim a perfect fire safety record simply because 0 kitchen fires were ever recorded.
Because the detector wasn't there to catch the fires. Small fires might have happened, structural damage might have been done, smoke might have filled the room.
But because the system lacked the mechanism to observe the harm, it recorded 0 incidents.
Right. And the landlord might genuinely believe their building is safe based on that log.
Okay, let's unpack this. How does a governance framework do the exact same thing?
Well, you do it by relying on policies that exist purely on paper, right? But they are totally invisible to the decision makers on the ground.
Like checking a box.
Exactly. The standard audit question for any institution is always, do you have a policy for this? But the omission platform doesn't ask that. Because having a policy is just owning the smoke detector.
Leaving it in the box doesn't help anyone.
Precisely. Instead, the platform asks, how clearly can the people responsible for the policy actually see the domain it governs?
Okay.
So it evaluates governance across 8 distinct domains, things like identity continuity, family integrity, agency, consent. And it does this using 2 key mathematical variables.
Let's break those down.
Sure. The first is H, which stands for harm potential. This is scored on a scale from 0 to 1. And it asks a really blunt question. How severely does the failure of this domain damage a human being?
So in the context of our analogy, the harm potential is the fire itself. It's the actual devastation that occurs if things go wrong.
Yes. And the second variable is W, or visibility weight. This is also scored from 0.01 to 1.
Okay.
This represents how clearly the framework currently sees, measures, and tracks this domain in practice. Basically, is your smoke detector plugged in, properly calibrated, and actively monitored?
So I want to make sure I'm wrapping my head around this before we get to the actual scores. If a framework has a really high harm potential, say separating a child from their family, but a really low visibility weight, what does that look like in the real world?
It looks like a system that makes massive, life-altering decisions without ever requiring the people making those decisions to look at the consequences.
Wow.
You've legislated an intention, but you've omitted the observation. And from those 2 variables, harm and visibility, the omission platform generates 3 specific outputs.
This is where the abstract math translates into hard forensic reality.
Right. So the first output is the current score.
Which is what the framework reports about itself, right?
Correct. It's the framework's self-assessment. But crucially, it is weighted by what it can actually see. The second output is the true score.
A hypothetical score.
Exactly. It asks, what would this system look like if every single domain were fully visible? Like if that visibility weight, that W, was cranked up to a perfect 1.0 across the board, what would the exposure be?
And the space between those 2 numbers is where the truth lives.
Yes. That brings us to the third and most important output, the risk delta.
Okay.
This is the mathematical gap between the current score and the true score. It is the number that never appears in an institution's annual report. It is the ultimate, undeniable verdict on what the system is structurally hiding from itself.
Which brings us to the moment of truth.
Yeah.
Because Shane took this platform and he uploaded the full, unedited text of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child into it.
He did.
He used Gemini 2.5 Flash as the scoring model to forensically read every single article, and then he manually verified the output against the text of the document.
Yeah, he pointed this radar at one of the most revered human rights documents in modern history.
And the findings are honestly stark.
They really are. When the UNCRC is run through the platform, the current score, again, what the convention reports about itself based on its own limited visibility, is 62 out of 100.
Okay.
But the true score, the actual structural exposure, if every right named in the text were rigorously tracked, drops to 26 out of 100.
Leaving the UNCRC with a risk delta of plus 36.
Exactly.
Wait, so a 62 sounds like a passing grade, or at least a system that's
Yeah.
trying. Like it's a solid C minus. But 100 wouldn't be a perfect A plus there.
What's fascinating here is the inversion of the score. It is the most vital concept to grasp. You have to completely deprogram how you think about these numbers.
Right, because it's not a standard test.
Exactly. The omission platform does not measure performance. It measures omission. It measures blindness. Therefore, a high current score is not good news for the people trapped inside the system. A score of 100 out of 100 does not mean the framework is perfect. It means the framework cannot see a single ounce of the harm it is responsible for causing.
Oh, wow.
It means every single smoke detector is sitting in a box, unpowered, while the building burns.
So a high current score existing alongside a massive risk delta is actually the most dangerous structural combination possible.
It is the blueprint of a systemic tragedy. It means the framework genuinely believes it is well governed while it is successfully structurally concealing massive amounts of harm exposure.
That makes total sense.
So when the UNCRC scores a 62, it means the convention is under pressure. It is forced to see some harm, which is why it hasn't defaulted to 100.
But that risk delta of 36.
That is 36 points of profound structural harm that the system is effectively hiding from itself.
And that 36-point gap isn't just randomly distributed, right? It doesn't just happen because of vague bureaucratic inefficiency.
No, not at all.
It has a very specific, undeniable shape. The blind spots collapse entirely, almost surgically, on the axis where the child's own participation is required.
Yes.
And we are not going to use euphemisms here. We are talking about children who are separated from their families. We are talking about mothers who relinquish them.
Exactly.
We are navigating a legal architecture that fundamentally renders the child invisible as an active consenting participant.
And we can map exactly where that invisibility occurs using what's called the Omission Risk Index, or the ORI.
Let's get into the ORI.
So this is a secondary metric the platform generates. It combines the sheer harm potential with the structural invisibility of a specific domain. To give you a baseline, if a domain scores over 1.5 on the ORI, it is classified as a severe blind spot.
And if it goes higher?
If it scores over 3.0, it is effectively erased from governance. Not marginalized, erased.
Okay, let's look at the 3 specific findings that emerged from the UNCRC
Yep.
in order of severity, starting with the absolute worst one.
Right. The highest omission risk in the entire document is self-determination.
And the ORI score for this is staggering. It hits 3.03.
Yeah. It crosses the threshold from blind spot into total structural erasure. It is officially classified as omitted.
Because the visibility weight is just 5%.
Exactly, just 5%. What this means, totally devoid of any legal jargon, is that the child has no standing whatsoever to refuse to initiate or to contest their own adoption.
They are legally immobile.
Entirely.
Now, I know exactly what the pushback to this is going to be from defenders of the convention. They will immediately point to Article 12.
Of course they will.
Because Article 12 explicitly gives the child the right to be heard in any judicial or administrative proceedings affecting them. So how can a document that mandates a child's right to be heard have a 5% visibility on self-determination?
Because the right to be heard is absolutely not the right to decide.
Right.
This is the core illusion of the framework. A child can be brought into a room, they can be heard, their opinion can be meticulously documented by a social worker, and then they can be entirely legally overruled by the competent authorities.
Because the standard is always best interest, right?
Exactly. The operative overriding standard throughout the entire convention is the best interests of the child. But crucially, those interests are exclusively determined by adults. The child is allowed to speak, but the architecture ensures their voice lacks the structural mass to actually alter the outcome.
Wow. Okay, moving to the second finding. This is where we look at consent. The ORI score here is 2.66.
Which is a massive blind spot.
Yeah. Visibility plummets to just 10%. And Article 21A of the convention is the linchpin here. It requires informed consent from, quote, persons concerned before an adoption can legally proceed.
And if you look at 35 years of adoption law, endless reform litigation has turned on the interpretation of that exact phrase, persons concerned.
Right, like who actually counts as a person concerned?
Yes. And the legal precedents make it painfully clear. Persons concerned means the mother who relinquished, assuming the system even bothers to obtain her genuine consent rather than coercing it. It means the adopters who are receiving the child. It means the state acting as the broker.
But do you know who is explicitly, repeatedly excluded from that definition?
The adoptee.
The adoptee. The convention simply does not require the child's consent to their own adoption.
At any age at which they might be capable of understanding and giving it.
The adoptee is the subject of the transaction.
Yeah.
They are the asset being transferred. They are not a consenting party to their own life trajectory.
It's devastating. And that flows perfectly into the third finding, which is agency. The ORI score for agency is 1.40.
Still a major blind spot.
Yes, with a visibility weight of 25%. This relies on Articles 9 and 20 of the Convention, which govern separation from parents and alternative care.
And the text dictates that the child's ethnic, cultural, and linguistic background shall be given, quote, due regard.
Due regard. It sounds polite, almost protective on the surface.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because in a legal context, that phrase carries chilling weight. What does due regard actually look like when it's applied to a human life? Because it doesn't mean determinative weight, does it?
Not at all. It does not give the child a veto. It does not require the system to align with the child's desires or identity.
So what does it require?
It simply means the authorities have to momentarily think about the child's background before they proceed to make the decision for them. The architecture of these proceedings positions the child entirely as the object of adult decisions.
The child is present in the text purely as a beneficiary of state action, never as a participant in it.
Exactly. So when we look at these three elements together, self-determination, consent, agency, it paints a devastating picture. The plus 36 risk delta isn't an accident.
It's the numerical representation of a legal framework that requires the child to be passive in order to function.
Yes.
So what does this actually mean for the person forced to live inside this architecture?
Well, it means we have to face a forensic postgraduate reality. We cannot sugarcoat this. This massive gap, this structural inability to see the child as a participating agent, is not a failure of implementation.
It's a feature.
It is a feature of the design. The UNCRC was built to protect children from external harms, horrors like exploitation, trafficking, involvement in armed conflict.
And it is largely equipped to do that.
It is, but it structurally does not protect the child from the framework itself. The entire system is load-bearing in its positioning of the child as an object to be saved, managed, and transferred.
And the human toll of existing as an object of law rather than a subject of it is profound. Shane describes this in his writing as a subsonic hum.
That's a powerful way to describe it.
It really is. It is this low, constant, inescapable pressure of moving through the world as someone whose entire legal and familial identity was constructed without their input.
Without the consent.
And without their participation. A treaty that just says the right, comforting words about identity and family integrity doesn't silence that hum.
No, it doesn't, because naming a right on a piece of paper in Geneva doesn't make it real. Measuring it, enforcing it, structurally requiring it to be visible to the people in power, that is the only thing that resolves it.
The convention names the adoptee perfectly. It just refuses to see them.
And that exact distinction is why Shane built the omission platform, to force the unseen into the light.
Which is where our deep dive transitions from a forensic analysis of the past into actual operational agency for the future. Because this story does not end in despair.
No, it certainly doesn't.
It doesn't end with a depressing report that just gets filed away in some cabinet. It ends with a specific, undeniable mechanism.
Yeah, the platform doesn't just hand you a grim score and walk away. Every single omission assessment ends with a required mechanism called the falsifiable ask.
I love this part.
It's brilliant. This is not a rhetorical complaint. It is not a petition asking an institution to, just do better. It is a direct mathematical measurement test thrown squarely at the institution.
And for the UNCRC, that falsifiable ask is directed straight at the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child and the state parties that ratify it. Yeah. And the challenge is incredibly precise. Publish the detection probability for every single domain you claim to govern. Then, recompute your ethics score with those omitted rights. Self-determination, consent, and agency return to the denominator.
Score them at full visibility, not 5% or 10%.
Right.
And here is the genius of the falsifiable ask. It corners the institution with its own data. If the UN runs those numbers at full visibility and the score holds.
If the system is truly as comprehensive and healthy as it claims to be.
Right. If the score holds, then they can say so publicly. They can prove the gap doesn't exist. But if the score drops...
If that 36-point gap suddenly appears in their own internal math...
then the omission is undeniably real. It is no longer an emotional grievance. It is a mathematical certainty. And the gap now has a name.
You cannot argue with the math of your own blind spots once they have been quantified.
You really can't.
And the most empowering part of all this is that the omission platform isn't locked away in some ivory tower. It isn't hidden behind an academic paywall or an exorbitant corporate subscription. It is entirely open.
It is free, it is browser-based, and it respects your privacy. You do not even need to create an account to use it.
That means anyone listening to this right now has the exact same forensic capability that Shane used on the UN. Think about what that means for your own life.
It's huge.
You can go to the platform right now and upload any governance framework that affects you. A corporate board report from your company, a national public health policy, a local child protection framework in your district.
Anything. You can run a deep scan using your own AI API key in about 2 minutes. The model instantly reads hundreds of pages of documents and finds the structural evidence.
Or if you don't want to use AI, you can do a manual quick assessment in 5 minutes simply by answering the platform's prompts about harm and visibility.
The power dynamic shifts immediately. The UNCRC has a risk delta of 36. For 35 years, that 36-point gap was just a feeling.
Yeah.
It was that subsonic hum experienced by survivors of forced adoption, by separated children, by mothers whose consent was erased. But today, it is no longer just a feeling.
It has a number.
It has a radar, and it has a download link.
Wow.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it forces a profound, almost uncomfortable shift in how we evaluate the massive systems that control our lives. The fundamental question isn't whether an institution like the United Nations means well.
Right, of course it does.
The drafters of the convention in 1989 absolutely meant well. But the real question is meaning well the same as seeing clearly?
And the math unequivocally tells us it is not. Intention does not equal observation.
It really doesn't.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over long after this audio ends. As you navigate the world, as you look at the institutions, the workplaces, or the legal frameworks governing your own life, what are the harms they are structurally designed to be blind to? Because until you step up and measure the omission yourself, the system will always look at its empty logbook, smile, and tell you it's working perfectly. Thank you for joining us for this forensic exploration. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.